Baruch Hashem, you're a bad Jew.
Shalom.
Shalom Chaverim. If that phrase sounds familiar to you, it's because I'm interviewing z.e.silver. Z.e.silver is an incredible TikTok and content creator who has gone out there and spoken to the political and religious ties to the land of Israel, but has also just done a really good job of representing what Zionism actually is. And I think he is the perfect person to speak on the subject of politics, especially in today's day where we are now voting for the future. Will it be Kamala? Will it be Trump? I don't know, but hey, here is z.e.silver. Z.E., welcome to the podcast. How are you, man?
I am good. Thank you so much for having me, Chaz. I appreciate that. I do my best. And Shalom Chaverim to you and to all of your listeners.
Thanks so much. And before we actually begin, I'm going to, challenge you as I challenge everybody in the 4-minute Bad Jew challenge. But I got to ask Zach, where does Shalom Chaverim come from? When did you kind of start that process? When did you guys start that phrase?
So the reason that if you are watching this on video and you see that the @ for my TikTok is different than my actual name, it's because I've had 2 accounts banned before I finally got to the 3rd one. And basically what I realized was that maybe the reason why I was being constantly hit with community violations for bullying and harassment was about my tone. And so I thought about this one guy who does what I do. He's much bigger. He's got like 3 million followers. Maybe people will know him, but he's this guy who's Australian, but he's like Indian or something like that. And he basically stitches people who talk about like different ethnic groups and religions. And he goes, "Hello, my friend." And he's so informative. And it was funny because as I was following him and I saw how much people were like in the comments saying things like, "Oh, I just love it when I see that hello, my friend," or hear the hello, my friend. It just makes me feel good. And so I thought about it and I was like, what is a really good way to showcase that like I'm coming to you as a quote unquote friend? And so I started off with Shalom Chaver and like Shalom Chavera. And I was subsequently told by Israelis that is not actually the way that you say it in Hebrew. And so I was like, okay, well, what's the best way to make this all the same, which is Shalom Chaverim. And it was just also set me up to have a lighter tone when stitching people. And it honestly worked. And then everybody started to catch on and it had kind of the effect that it did with this other guy. And it's very funny how everybody else looks at me the way that I look at him or that the others looked at him that says, "Oh, what do you mean you didn't say the Shalom Chaverim? Like you have to start over." And I'm like, "Oh, all right, sounds like a plan."
Well, Zach, I think that's awesome. And without further ado, let's get you challenged to the 4-minute Bad Jew challenge where you got to tell your life story in 4 minutes. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Excellent. Echad, shtaim, shlosh, yalla.
This will be pretty easy, I think, because I don't really want to go too much into my life story. What I will say, for the most part, is that I grew up in a very Ashken normative community, if what you would call it. I didn't meet my first Sephardic Jew until I was like 15 years old when he ordered rice at Chipotle during Passover. And I was like, "You're not allowed to do that." And he's like, "No, I am. I'm Sephardic." And then basically I didn't even think about it again until I ended up working for a Hillel at the University of Texas at Austin. And I started to really fundamentally understand just truly how different various Jewish communities are and how difficult it is to have a Jewish identity when you don't live around other Jews. It was really the first time that I understood how important it was to have Jews be a part of a community, and also how much of a correlation there is between having a community and having a strong Jewish identity and just knowing what you belong to. And that radically changed just my outlook on almost everything, especially because I was always a large advocate for Israel. I was in college and I did that, but it wasn't until I worked for Hillel that I became an educator, and I learned the power and importance of taking on that role of being an educator. It was also during that time that I met my now wife. She was doing a similar job and we did long distance. And then she and I moved to Los Angeles, and I ended up working at the Los Angeles Jewish Federation as a fundraiser. And then as a means of COVID, we crazily enough ended up in Arizona, which is never where we thought we were going to. I tried to build a startup, which obviously did not work out. It failed, but it was an awesome experience. But nonetheless, I wanted to get into tech, and I tried for a couple of years. I bounced around a bunch of places and realized that it just wasn't exactly what I wanted it to be. Even when I got the exact job that I was looking for. And when that didn't work out, I really had a come to Moses moment about what were my skill sets, what were my strengths, what am I actually good at, what do I really want to do, what I like to do. And really what it came down to was I loved working for Jews. I loved working in the Jewish community. I loved working with Jewish coworkers. I loved working with the Jewish community. And I got very lucky, and I ended up working for Jewish National Fund. And so I'm a fundraiser for them here. I've done that for the last 2+ years, and I love it very, very much.
Awesome. Well, Zach, you killed the 4-minute Bad Jew challenge. Well done. And I got to say, first of all, big fan of JNF. Love what they do. Also, got to say that I also was once a part of the Jewish Federation. So a lot of great Jewish figures do come out of the Jewish Federation. I was in the PJ library for a little bit of time. That was pretty fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
As a quick disclaimer, by the way, just because I have to, none of the opinions that I say today are representative of my very apolitical organization. They are all representative of my own. I don't know nobody's going to have any problem, but nonetheless, I have to say it. And it's actually one of the really wonderful things that I love about JNF, that I don't have to deal in the politics the way that so many other Jewish and Israel organizations do. Jewish National Fund just builds things, and I love it.
Well, there you go. And I think that it's a really important disclaimer for the question I'm just about to ask, because I think that we're touching on a very touchy subject, and especially with my approach. Okay. Just full transparency to my listeners. Okay. It's been a very weird, inner conflict kind of couple of months. I've been conflicted for the past couple of months because I see a direction that I have been loyal to all my life, a political direction that I've been loyal to all my life. And this year has completely changed so many opinions of mine to the point where I actually don't know which direction's up. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there. I've been undecided for some time now. Tomorrow is literally the last day for me to make a decision, and I feel obligated to vote. When I get to the ballot box tomorrow, it's going to be this very conflicting moment where I'm not really sure if the vote that I'm going to do, A, is going to be what truly represents my values, if the person I'm voting for actually does they have me in mind when I am voting, and B, if my vote even matters. So at the end of the day, Zach, it's important to ask, to look at this from a Jewish perspective, really how should Jews be voting in this upcoming election? What really is best for us as a people?
So you're not alone, first and foremost. If you say you've been having this struggle for the last couple months, I've been literally struggling basically since October 7th. For many Jews, for many liberal Jews, progressive Jews, for me, prior to my time working at Hillel or in tech, I worked for the Democratic Party. I helped get Democrats elected. I've worked at every level of government, from on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., all the way down to a local school board race. I have been a part of the Democratic establishment, and to see the way that the Democratic Party handled this last year has been devastating for me. And so you're not alone. And I think that's the first thing I would love for your listeners to hear, because I think so often us as Jews do just feel alone, and progressive and liberal Jews especially feel a whole host of feelings over this last year. And it has led to a lot of people deciding that they're going to vote for any number of candidates. And so when you ask that question of, well, who should Jews vote for? My answer is you should vote for whoever you want to. I don't have a strong preference on who is going to better represent your values as a Jew. What I would say is that on a practical level, if you wanted to vote for somebody who is going to be better on Israel, it would be Trump. If you wanted to vote for somebody who on a practical level is more likely to tackle anti-Semitism here in the United States, I would say, frankly, like vote for Donald Trump, crazily enough. On the other hand, if you feel like that your Jewish values are better represented by what Kamala Harris represents, or you just can't bring yourself to vote for somebody who committed insurrection, who attempted to commit a coup d'etat in some respects, then I totally understand why you wouldn't vote for him. And if you feel like you need to vote for Harris, even though you don't necessarily believe that she's the best, then but you need to vote against him, like that totally makes sense. Also, if you feel like Harris is going to, stay by Israel the way that Biden did, right? There's not a lot that she can really do about, stopping to fund Iron Dome. If you really believe that, she is going to fight anti-Semitism, with Doug Emhoff and him being in the White House, and you think that really matters, then that's true to you. And on the other hand, if you finally have come to the conclusion that, you know what, you're not going to vote for either because neither represents you, neither represents your values, you don't believe either of them in what they say, then don't vote for either. Vote in Nikki Haley, vote in Josh Shapiro, write in Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't know, but you don't have to vote for them either. And all three are correct.
It's a great answer, and I think that's an acceptable answer to first of all break it down on a practical level, but second of all to also just, this podcast is not intended to impose how you should be voting in this upcoming election. And that's, I knew I needed to have this topic on the podcast, but I also knew that, okay, if we're going to do this topic, we need to dance a fine line here, because one thing that's unique about my listenership on this podcast is that we have people on both sides of this. You could call it a bipartisan podcast. And that's for myself. I think that represents my personal values because I'm a moderate. And I think something that really became clear, especially after my trip to Israel a few months ago. So a few months ago, for those who probably know by now, but those who don't know, like Zach here, I was in Israel a few months ago where I actually, for the first time, got to step foot in a kibbutz. And when I was there, it wasn't just any kibbutz, it was kibbutz Be'eri. It was one of the kibbutzim that was hit really hard after October 7th. And it's an unprocessed site, okay? To be very clear what that means, it means that I breathed Jewish ash. It means that I saw Jewish blood. The only thing that was different about that site between then and October 7th was the fact that there were no dead bodies on the ground. That's really the only thing that's different about that site. So the reason why I bring up such a grim thing is because I saw a certain part of the world that I've never faced before. And also, by the way, I've heard the sounds of war. When I was at the Nova, when I was at the actual site of Nova, where the Nova nature party took place and the massacre, inevitably, I heard the sounds of war. Gaza's only a few miles away. So I had a whole reality shift from that experience. And the thing I learned very quickly is that idealism doesn't serve the Jews in a long term. And I think that translates to the American political system as well, is that idealism doesn't always serve the Jews. In fact, if you keep on looking at which values coincide with Jews, whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, we kind of are a bastard population. We don't really have a home. There is no father political system that serves us the best. And I was wondering if you could talk more on that.
Well, I think that we used to, because Israel, for the most part, was not as partisan as it is today. And it really all started with Obama and his Iran deal, when Obama wanted an Iran nuclear deal. And I was thinking about this earlier because I was thinking about why did just foreign policy in general become so partisan, because it used to be like that partisanship ends at the water's edge. And that's not the case anymore, clearly. And so I was like, man, Trump really, really, caused this. And then I was like, no, he accelerated it, but he was not the cause. It started with Obama because in 2010, 2012, whenever he started with the JCPOA, he put a serious wedge amongst Jews who were Democrats, but were heavily pro-Israel, and Democrats more than they were pro-Israel. And so you had this dividing line in which all of a sudden Republicans found what they call a wedge issue in our community. And so they hammered it, and they hammered it hard, and it literally caused a serious divide. Then when Trump came into play, then all of a sudden you have this whole thing. Now, what happened with Trump and how he accelerated it is because he allowed Russia to become involved in the election. I'm not saying that he's a Russian asset. I'm not saying that he is, compromised. I'm not saying anything at all. What I'm saying is that just the mere fact that he did not clearly and definitively say, no, Russia, stay away, I reject it all prima facie, meant that created an opening for Democrats to talk about Russia and in a partisan way. And the quick irony of it is that back in 2012, when Obama and Romney were going in a debate, there's this very clearly memorable moment in that debate when the moderator asks the two of them, who is America's number one enemy? And Romney goes, it's Russia. And Obama laughs and goes, the 1980s called, they want their foreign policy back. And everybody laughed, ha, ha, ha. And it became this big moment, including myself, by the way. I want to be very clear that I was extremely smug about it. And my very true conservative friend was like, no, you're the idiot. And fast forward 4 years, and lo and behold, I was in fact the idiot along with all of us. And literally it took less than 4 years for all of us to take Romney's position that Russia was our main adversary. And as a result, the Democrats, who really do not have, I would say, a cohesive foreign policy, decided to take this on as a foreign policy, which is, well, we know that this is a wedge issue for Republicans, which is, are you going to be for Trump and Russian interference and Russian authoritarianism, or are you going to be about America and American democracy? And if you are voting for Trump, you're voting against American democracy. And so now we are in this place where in 2024, we have Russia, who is invading Ukraine, and we have Iran, who has surrounded Israel with a ring of fire. And you have Democrats who are pro-Ukraine and anti-Russia, pro-Ukraine and anti-Israel. And then you have Republicans who are pro-Israel and anti-Ukraine, despite the fact that literally Russia and Iran are on the same side and it's all a part of the same war. And so if you actually were to have a cohesive foreign policy, you would have partisanship end at the water's edge, and you would get to a point where it's like, oh yes, they are both our enemy. We should both be supporting Israel and Ukraine. And instead we're not. And so as a result, that is why Jews don't have a home right now, because as Jews, we benefit from strong American democracy. And right now, American democracy is getting threatened from both sides, because both sides are also totally accepting and praising almost authoritarian regimes because it is against their political opponent.
To speak on that, there was an idea that was introduced to me, maybe only a few quarters ago. When we think about a political spectrum, typically when you think of any spectrum, it's a straight line. You have the far left and you have the far right, right? I'll probably put an animation of a line in post-production and explain this, right? But someone explained to me the concept of the horseshoe effect. And when
it was probably me. It was probably me.
It might have been you.
And political horseshoe theory has been my thing for over a decade now.
So yeah, and you know exactly where I'm going with this. It's kind of what you implied here, which is what triggered the idea. So the political spectrum here is that there's a horseshoe effect. And this is, again, why I'm conflicted as a voter, is because I have to recognize that whatever my vote is, I'm enabling an extreme version of it. And what I mean by that is that with the horseshoe theory, right, what that means for those who do not understand what a horseshoe is, you can imagine the horseshoe, it's almost a circle, it's almost an oval, but it's not quite. And that's because our political parties in this country are actually both veering towards extremes that reflect each other much more closely than they ever have before. They used to be complete polar opposites. Now they're actually really similar in a lot of ways. And they both come with their own extreme agendas. So if you want to take the left, you're coming with the extremism that comes under the umbrella of progressive leftism. If you're voting right, then, consequentially, you'll be, potentially enabling the extreme right, which has also been deemed Project 25. And that's, again, one of these areas where voters like myself become very conflicted. Well, which extreme am I more willing to enable then?
And of course, do you want to know what the irony is? The irony of the political horseshoe is that it is literally based upon Jew hatred. Like the thing that gets, essentially, you can wrap the horseshoe around a couple of different things. Like one is identity politics. Both the right and the left adhere to identity politics. The right adheres, and is focused on white identity, while the left extreme is focused on any other like non-white identity. Also authoritarianism and their propensity for it. So the right wing is more than happy to, the extreme obviously is looking at, authoritarianism, even though, the majority of their like party and like the base of their party is very anti-authoritarianism, right? They're like very much against a strong executive power until you get into the deep parts of the horseshoe. On the left, like they are very into authoritarianism, like a Stalin or a Mao, like they love it. And then the last real part is when it comes to Jew hatred, because at the end of the day, Jews don't fall into any of those lines where essentially Jews are neither white nor are we not white, because if you look at the two of us on the camera, like we are white passing people. We experience white privilege when it comes to how we interact with the world around us in this context, right? In a different context, we are not white. When you put us in a room full of like people who are Nazis, like they're going to say like, you're not white. But even when you think about the culture of whiteness, right? That is not us. Like whiteness is not a culture, it is a lack of culture, right? It is an amalgamation of a bunch of white passing ethnicities like Polish and Irish and German and Dutch and French and all that kind of stuff over the last 150 to 200 years. That is an identity that was created out of a rejection of blackness, essentially. And so we don't fall into that category because we have distinctive culture. We have distinctive foods. We are everything that is an ethnicity. But we are an ethnicity that is white passing, but we are one that never gave that up, as opposed to the Irish did. The Italians, for the most part, maybe outside of, or other than, New Jersey and New York, right? And I guess the Irish and, Boston and stuff, but the vast majority of the white passing ethnic identities gave up their distinctive ethnic identities for the most part in relation to whiteness, as opposed to Jews, for the most part, really did not. And so as a result, we end up as the target from both the right and the left. And that is how you end up as us as kind of the central focal point of the horseshoe.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think with the hazardous environment that you just described in the political system and how we as Jews, have conflicting issues on a cultural level, on a genetic level with our American counterparts, I guess my question then is, do you think that we even have a part to play in American politics as a whole? And is America even for Jews anymore?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Here's the important thing that I need like every Jew to recognize, acknowledge, and internalize. Jews in the diaspora only survive and thrive when we have a democracy and when we have a strong leader that is essentially for us. Like, I would say that the reason that Jews have had somewhat of a protected class is because, frankly, like George Washington sent a letter to the Jews up in Rhode Island saying that he wants them a part of the American project. And where we struggle in any part of the world at any time in history is when we have maybe a strong leader, but not a democracy, or we have a democracy, but we have a weak leader. And so, for instance, like when you think about and this, again, this kind of goes back to the mob to the right and to the left. So the authoritarianism of the fascist, right, is the strong leader on the right. The authoritarianism of the mob is what you see on the left. And while you can look at Mao or Stalin, like they are products of the mob, they are products of people's revolutions, essentially. And so what you need is a strong leader that is backed by a true democracy. That is why we have survived here in America as much as we have, as opposed to almost anywhere in the world, even when we have like very small communities, but they're not what we have here in America. And specifically in America, the First Amendment, the protection of religious freedom, the protection for religious practice, like everything that goes into that and the protection of individual rights really does not exist in the same way as it does here in America. So if you were to want to be a Jew anywhere, obviously the first and foremost place would be Israel. But if you had to choose anywhere in the world to be a Jew other than Israel, like it would be America. And we have to protect American democracy in order to protect the Jewish diaspora.
You said to protect the Jewish diaspora?
Yeah, to basically like, here's the thing, and this is kind of like a part of my work, is that Israel is not ready, does not have the capacity to take in the rest of the world's Jews. It just doesn't. There's a huge cost of living crisis happening in the center of Israel, and the places on the periphery do not have the infrastructure in order to take all of us in. Beyond that, just from a cultural standpoint, there are obviously a lot of similarities because we're all Jewish. There are also like major, major differences. And I don't think that I think that there is a sizable enough portion of the Israeli population who loves Americans dearly, and also what we would do to the Israeli culture, like en masse. I'm talking about if all of a sudden 1 million American Jews moved to Israel, like over the course of the next 5 years, I think that we would drastically disrupt their current culture. That I think would lead to like serious backlash, just because in general, whenever you have rapid change, you have rapid backlash. And so I'm not saying that Jews shouldn't move to Israel. What I'm saying is that it is equally important to have a strong Israel to protect Jews. And also it's important to have places where Jews can live safely and freely in the diaspora.
Okay. Interesting. No, I think that's interesting. I don't want to go further down that track because that will open up a can of worms that detracts from the topic of the podcast.
Sure.
But I think that's a really interesting idea for me to think about just on my own, and maybe for the listeners as well. Going back to U.S. politics for a second, do you have any predictions for the upcoming election if one side wins versus the other, and how will that impact Jews in the long run?
Yeah. So, I mean, I made a video making a prediction. I was going back and forth whether or not I wanted to, and I kind of basically just said, F it. Like, I say what I say, and if I'm dead wrong, then I'll take the egg on my face. And actually, I think that's just as important for people on the internet to like publicly state that they were wrong and like, examine why they were wrong publicly. I think it's super healthy actually for the internet in general, because I think that if you could just like delete the video, or you just constantly rage back and no, it was this, and this, or this is why I got it wrong. I didn't really get it wrong. Like the polls were off. Like, no. Look, you made the call, you made the prediction, you own it. And if I got egg on my face, I got egg on my face, and like, I'll take it. Right. So I made the prediction video, and I said that Trump was going to win by a particularly like large amount. I think when people were responding and reacting to that video, they were looking at very individual things about in general, right? They were looking at the national polls that had it as a tie. They were looking at all of these other things. And also I think that a lot of them are operating off of really, really bad assumptions. And at the end of the day, like we are a country that is based off of electoral college. And so it's really not about winning a national election. It's about winning 50 state elections. And so when I looked at the map and I saw how many swing states were up for grabs, I saw that he was just going to win a majority of these swing states. I have him winning Arizona. That's like the easiest call I could make. I have him winning Georgia. I have him winning North Carolina. I have him winning Nevada, mostly because of the Hispanic vote and how underwater she is with it by 25 points. I also think that there's been a bigger shift in union members and how they vote. So people have been kind of relying on union votes in Nevada. I think that like at the membership level, more of them are going to vote for Trump than people would like to admit or people know. And then the big tickets are, and then she's going to win Wisconsin is what I have. The big tickets, are obviously Michigan and Pennsylvania. I don't necessarily believe that he's going to quote unquote win Michigan. I just think that she's going to lose Michigan because I think that there are enough people who are either going to vote uncommitted or vote for Jill Stein that, if she loses Michigan by 5,000 votes, by 10,000 votes, like she loses the state, like that's how it works. Right. And so all it takes is 5,000 people or 5,000 more people to vote for Jill Stein than to vote for her. And like all of a sudden she loses. In Pennsylvania, the reason I have her losing is mostly because of the Jewish vote. Actually, outside of Los Angeles and New York City and Chicago, I think, and in Miami, you have Philadelphia. Basically, you have this, and in general, in Pennsylvania, you have such a massive population of Jews, and the Jewish vote for Democrats historically has been somewhere in the 70 to 75%, closer into that 75% range, if not higher. For Democrats, just like historically, like every election almost. But like recently, if you look at the polls of Jews, which are really tough to say, but like she is drastically underwater, even though a majority of Jews will still vote for her, there won't be enough. And if you look at the places like in Pennsylvania, where it has been the hottest topic with the University of Penn, with Pittsburgh and Tree of Life, and just in general, like you have, a classically conservative, more type of pro-Israel type of Jew, I would say, and also the issues around Josh Shapiro and how much they loved him and that he was overlooked because of his Judaism. I don't care what you have to say. That's why he was overlooked. I think that, again, you're looking at these small little percentages that swing here and there in which, it makes a difference. And all Trump has to do is win by like an extra 10, 15,000, 25,000 votes. And like he wins. And clearly John Fetterman is looking at the polls too. And he wouldn't have stayed where he was if he didn't think that it meant like it was a politically good thing to do. So when you look at all of these swing states, like that's the loss, like by a lot.
Right. Well, I have one final question before we end this podcast. And I want to, again, thank you for being, upfront with your opinions and your insights while also still being delicate and respectful towards the sensitivity of the topic.
Of course.
So here's my final question for you. And that is that, do you think that whatever the result is tomorrow on November 5th, right? This episode is going to go out tonight. Okay. As soon as this episode is over, I'm going to get to work. I'm going to release this episode. I'm going to start promoting like crazy. Okay?
Oh God.
But tomorrow this episode goes out. Tomorrow the elections are. Tomorrow is when the elections are happening, which means that tomorrow is when the course of America is going to change, right? Do you think that it's all because of what happened on October 7th, 2023?
Yeah.
Or do you think that, yes.
100%. I think that October 7th at a historical level will go down as a globally changing event. I don't think that, in 50, 60 years, like people will actually say that. I think it'll be a small part of in the same way that people know about World War I, but they don't know necessarily that like it was the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, or they don't necessarily know. I'll even admit, I don't know if there are any particular events that lead up to the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. I can't tell you them, right? I just know that that's like the pinnacle moment that started it, but I can't tell you what led up to it, if there were any other pinnacle moments. And so, for instance, like you have this October 7th moment, which we all see as this defining moment, but for all we know, like Iran, the Islamic Republic could have this like massive major attack on Israel between like now and next week. And that could be looked at as the defining moment of the next massive war, according to historians, in 50 years, right? But as of now, I will stake my claim that when you look at October 7th and what it did, there's a whole host of things that, we can go into like at another podcast if you want to have me back on to talk about it.
Of course.
But here's why I think that October 7th is this, not just a country defining moment for us here in America or for Israel, but a globally defining one. It also depends on what happens in the future, but nonetheless, like I really do. When you first and foremost let's look at Israel first, right? There was this massive stalemate over the last 20 years or so, since Hamas took over Gaza, that there was this back and forth between rockets would be fired, then Israel would counter, and then Israel would go into an incursion, and there would be this like hullabaloo and whatever it was. And October 7th, like when I first saw like that pickup truck of people with guns, I was like, oh, well, I guess here we go again. And then not the same, right? And so as a result of October 7th, like Hamas has been decimated and it is on its way to being eliminated, which means that Gaza is going to change. And the way that people have to look at the conflict and the Palestinian issue has to change. And additionally, because Israelis don't see it the same way, all of a sudden they're going to have to change how they approach Israelis. And then on October 8th, what happened? Hezbollah started firing rockets. And so again, you have this stalemate since 2006 that the Israeli security apparatus was like just waiting for the chance to go to war with Hezbollah because they knew it was going to happen eventually, right? And you're talking about this massive force with this huge swath of ballistic missiles and just like a ton of artillery. And they're like, we have to be prepared for that war more than anything else. And like in a matter of weeks, they took out all of their leadership. And then all of a sudden, as a result, fast forward, and I could go into this, but fast forward and you're looking at a direct hot war with the Islamic Republic. Like nobody thought that would happen. Nobody thought that would ever happen because there would always be this tit for tat kind of thing. And October 7th changed the dynamics of the game. So from a regional level, we could theoretically be in a place where the dominoes are falling, that the Islamic Republic could actually end up failing, not anytime soon, but over the course of years. And therefore, as a result, if the Islamic Republic were to fall and were to be replaced by something like a constitutional monarchy, you're talking about changes to the global order that have not been that we can't comprehend right now, because that type of thing hasn't really happened since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1990 or 1991. So there's that aspect of it. Here in the country, where I think we have been on a path for the last 10 years, or really, probably since 2012 or maybe since 2008, right? Since Obama got elected, we've been on this path, right? So Obama gets elected, then the Tea Party gets elected in 2010. That leads to Republicans becoming what they are. And then you have 2016, obviously, when it comes to Trump. That leads us down a path. But Democrats as well are creating this world around identity politics and DEI. And for the most part, people like myself who are Jews and progressive Jews and liberal Jews are still in it, because even though we kind of know that they don't really like Zionism or Zionists, they still like Jews, they're still out, to protect us and to defend us when like Tree of Life synagogue happens. But, we're good with it. What happens on October 7th, we realize that's all false. We realize that everything we thought about how other minority groups looked at us is entirely different. We're looking at academic institutions that are going to be radically different, especially if Trump wins, especially if Republicans take Congress. You're looking at how we potentially fund academic institutions. We're looking at how we look at education at K through 12, because it's happening there as well. We're looking at our entire way of looking at the world around identity and DEI and progressivism over the last 10 years in an entirely different way, because we have seen the product of this, which is all of these people who are out literally supporting domestic terrorists. And you have, and I'm sorry to say this, but like a Democratic Party specifically that is unwilling to execute the law, right? So if everybody wanted to criticize Republicans for not, basically executing the law and holding Trump accountable for January 6th and not saying that it was a coup or an insurrection, like if you can't even say that people literally wearing the headbands of US designated terrorist organizations are in fact terrorist supporters, you have lost all credibility. And because the Democrats have approached this issue from a political standpoint rather than from a moral standpoint, right? They decided to go with what is politically advantageous for us, which is to not piss them off too much. Now, all of a sudden, you have a Jewish population that is rethinking how they're approaching the Democratic Party, how they're approaching their politics. But it's not just us. That's why you're looking at Black men who are supporting Trump more than they were. You're looking at Hispanic men and Latino men who are supporting Trump more. You are frankly looking in general at Black support and Hispanics not supporting the Democratic Party the way that they always counted on them, 10 years ago when they decided to say, we're going to try to bring in as many different identities together in order to face the white people. So this all came as a result of October 7th. And had October 7th not happened, we would not be in this situation right now. We would not be talking about this right now, because you wouldn't have Americans just outright supporting designated terrorist organizations and a political party that isn't prosecuting them. And so therefore, that is the moment in which this country has changed and will change going forward, regardless of who wins.
Really fascinating answer. I really appreciate you painting that picture as clearly as you did. It's one story I want to share with you and the audience before we end this podcast. And it's actually a story that very few people actually know about me. Okay, this is my fun fact that I don't share. So people know this, right? I sued my school. San Francisco State. I was a Hillel intern, by the way. So you and I both have that Hillel background. But I was a Hillel intern. I was also the president of something called the Jewish Mural Committee. San Francisco State had different cultural murals for their campus on the Malcolm X Plaza. Malcolm X mural was one of the many murals on that campus. So I thought we should get a Jewish mural. And so I created a Jewish mural committee from Jews in the community to create it. And so because of all the hoops and loops that the school sent us through, when two major incidences against Jews happened on San Francisco State's campus, I was entered into a class action lawsuit led by the Lawfare Project, which is a great organization, right? So fast forward 2 years later in 2019, we won. Okay, we won the case. And by the way, this was on my birthday, which I thought it was going to be the worst birthday ever, because I thought you were going to lose. I have to be in court on my birthday. Oh. And the school ended up settling. So I never had to step foot in the court. And as a matter of fact, I partied in a really fancy hotel because of that. That was really cool. Now, fast forward a year later. It's now 2020. And, again, remember my past here, I'm very loyally blue in my past, right? And, I was also an AEPI back in college. And the vice president of AEPI at the time was a man named Elon Carr. Elon Carr, when Donald Trump became president, became recruited as the czar of anti-Semitism. That was his nickname. So he was the head of combating anti-Semitism under the Trump administration. But because I had a rapport through AEPI, and also because Elon Carr knew about the case, Volk for CSU Board of Trustees, when Donald Trump signed the legislation about defunding schools that were anti-Semitic, I was indirectly invited to the White House the next day.
Wow.
And by the way, when I got this call, of all the times I could have gotten this call, I was in the middle of a shift at Dave & Buster's. I was working at Dave & Buster's in Hollywood.
That's actually amazing.
Which is, picture me in my checkered referee outfit, this cringy outfit, hundreds of children on my boss.
I love that so much. With the keep
awful experience. I get this call. The president wants to see you.
Did you tell him that? I hope that you were like, guys, I have to go. The president just called. That's what I would have done.
So here's the thing. And this is something that I quote my dad for saying, because this is very true. The only thing cooler than accepting an invitation from the president is denying an invitation from the president. And that's exactly what I did at the time. I actually had denied my one opportunity to meet Donald Trump. And, it's just a funny story that I just want to deposit into this episode. I didn't think I was going to ever tell it, but it's true. That happened. And that was just right outside. That was right outside.
Just hated Donald Trump in 2017. I still would have gone to the White House. I don't care. That's just that. There's a moment and that's the thing. And if I could maybe offer one final thing, especially, with the election.
Sure.
Is I know that a lot of people believe that if Harris is elected, life in America for Jews is over and that Israel will become extinct. And a lot of people believe that if Trump is elected, then democracy will be at its end by 2028. And I just want to tell both peoples, neither of which is true. Is Harris good for Israel? I don't personally believe so. Is she good for fighting Jew hatred in this country? I don't think so. Is American Jewish life going to end? No. For Trump. Is democracy actually going to end by 2028? No, it's not. And the reason being is because of our democracy. It is because of our system. When the founding fathers created this system of government 250 years ago, they thought of a man like Donald Trump and literally said, how do we stop this man from ending our democracy? And that's why they created the system that they did. And beyond that, how do we stop the mob? That's what they ultimately were trying to think about, was how do we stop a guy like Trump from ending our democracy? But they also thought about how do we stop the mob from ending our democracy? That is why we have what we have. That is why we have the system. That's why we have this stupid electoral college. That's why we have senators that represent like 500,000 people from Wyoming and they represent like 50 million people in California. It's why we have the 435 individual congressmen that represent 435 individual districts throughout the country. This is why we have this system of government. It's why we have a constitution. It's why we have a legislature. So before you believe that the president has all of the power in the world to do the worst thing ever that you imagine is going to happen, remember, we have a democracy. We have a system of government that is set up, that is designed specifically to prevent either outcome. And so if you believe in America, if you believe in our democracy, if you believe in the founding fathers, then it is very, very easy to believe that while it might be hard, it might be tough, it might be really, really terrible, if your candidate doesn't win, when 2028 comes around, we're going to be okay. Israel will still be here, and our democracy will still be here, and Jews will still live in America.
Zach, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. I think there's tons of sensationalism around this election. And at the same time, you can't undermine the importance of this election at the same time. So I really do want to thank you for coming on here, giving your political analysis, and again, being, giving a nonpartisan answer to, the realities of what Jews are facing right now. This couldn't be a more important election, and it's going to shape our future. It's going to shape the future of Israel, but it's not going to mean that it's the end of anything either. So I really do want to thank you again. And to the listeners out there, we'll see you in the next episode of Bad Jew, which actually comes out in a few days. Literally this week is a two episoder, and we have our first ever sponsor, which will be announced in a couple of days. So I'm really, really excited about that. But to the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in this podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Shalom.